그런데 이때
Stop! 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 Kids, don't you understand that? You're shooting at kids. Just pull back. Why are you shooting at them? Why are you shooting at them?
Welcome to our program at Palestine International Broadcast. I'm Osama Nazal. It's good to have you with us. The International Solidarity Movement, the ISM, is a Palestinian-led international movement to resist the Israeli occupation and help the Palestinians liberate their land through non-violent and direct action methods. Huwaida Arraf was one of the main founders of this international coalition to give the people of Palestine a voice in the world. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me, Osama.
Welcome, Huwaida. Huwaida, the Israeli occupation always has lies to spin while the Palestinian people have the truth to tell. And in 2002, you came to the occupied Palestinian territories and you broke through the Israeli military cordons to reach into the office of late leader Yasser Arafat, who was surrounded by the Israeli military forces and tanks. Tell me about that experience, how you felt when you saw the president at that time besieged by the Israeli forces, and how that helped you to tell the truth to the people in the United States and the West in general. Please.
Sure. Actually, before 2002, I had decided to move from the United States, where I was born and raised, to Palestine. I came to live in Jerusalem and work for a conflict resolution organization that worked with Palestinian and Israeli youth.
Yes.
And then a few months later, the Palestinian Intifada broke out that was sparked by then opposition Minister Ariel Sharon, opposition candidate who had gone up very provocatively to Al-Haram al-Sharif, and it sparked protests which spiraled not because of the actions of Ariel Sharon, but because of Palestinians being fed up, told to wait for their freedom while Israel continued to colonize their land and deny them basic rights. Unarmed protests were met with lethal force by the Israeli military, so that within the first month of these Palestinian protests for freedom, Israel had killed over 125 Palestinians. And the violence just got worse as Israel rolled in their tanks and their helicopters into Palestinian towns and villages, all to face off against the people just demanding freedom. I was there at the time, living there. Again, I had been working for this conflict resolution organization. I resigned. This wasn't about quote unquote conflict resolution. This was about liberating Palestine and Palestinians from a brutal settler colonial apartheid project. And therefore, I believe that people needed to take to the streets, and I was looking for what I could do. I joined with other internationals and some Israeli activists and Palestinian organizers, and we decided to globalize the Intifada. And we put out a call for people from all over the world to come stand with Palestinians, because Palestinians alone protesting were being shot dead, and nobody was holding Israel accountable.
Yeah.
In fact, the opposite, the international media was blaming Palestinians for their own deaths. And so we wanted internationals to come, to stand with Palestinians, to see what was happening, hopefully be able with their presence to lessen the violence that the Israeli soldiers were using against civilians, and then to be able to go back home and advocate. That was the start of the International Solidarity Movement, the idea behind it. And during the time of our third campaign, is when Israel reinvaded all Palestinian cities and put the Palestinian presidential compound, al-Muqata'a, and then President and Chairman Yasser Arafat under siege. During that time, it was a catastrophe. I mean, everybody in these Palestinian cities were under curfew. If you were found in the streets, you could be shot dead by Israeli soldiers. And we were looking for what we could do to change the situation. And we decided to challenge basically Israel's actions. And when they were besieging the compound and firing on the presidential compound, about to invade, we marched and put international in the compound in a way to pressure our governments to do something about it. You know, when internationals, when Americans and Germans and English went into the presidential compound, we can then say, hey, our governments, get Israel to stop doing this. You don't care about Palestinians, but we're also getting in the way. And so you asked me what I felt when I saw the situation and Chairman Arafat. It was a feeling of frustration that we needed to do something more and the world had to listen, what we need people to listen. Also awe at, you know, seeing the embodiment of the Palestinian liberation struggle in front of your eyes, and in this situation where he's stuck between four walls and no electricity. And at the same time, I was surprised, honestly, because he kept talking to us, to the internationals, about peace. And I was thinking, what are you talking about, peace and the peace process? Israel obviously doesn't want peace, but he kept recalling the peace process and his late friend, Yitzhak Rabin. And so here was this man that is almost vilified in the international community, being so, not only talking about peace, but also just so very gentle. So it was surprising, it was frustrating, it was awe-inspiring all at once. But our concern was really stopping the invasion, stopping the killing, and it constantly on our minds was what more.
Yes, Huwaida. Yeah. That is about your experience in the first part of Palestine. If we move to the second part of Palestine and we talk about the Israeli closure of the Gaza Strip and the campaigns that you have organized with your friends and your comrades in the ISM in order to break the Israeli closure on Gaza. Tell me about that experience and how you were able to give the people in Gaza hope that they are not alone facing the siege.
I hope it was hope, and I hope that hope is still alive. But what happened was in 2006 and 2007, when Israel tightened its closure on the Gaza Strip because they were dissatisfied with the results of Palestinian elections and Palestinian internal strife, they made it so you could not enter or exit Gaza. It was always difficult, but now they were forbidding you to enter and exit. Israel was even controlling how much food was allowed to enter Gaza. And it had created a catastrophic situation with rising unemployment and poverty and malnutrition and other diseases. The United Nations and the World Food Program were putting out reports that there were rising rates of malnutrition and stunted growth being seen in Gaza, which was shocking because this was not, Gaza is not poor. This was happening as a result of a deliberate policy by Israel to drive the people of Gaza to their knees, and it was infuriating. What was the United Nations doing about it? What were countries doing about it? Who was stopping Israel from this deliberate murderous policy? Nobody. And therefore, a few of us that were volunteers with the International Solidarity Movement started strategizing about what was possible to do. And one volunteer said, let's sail a boat to Gaza. Which honestly, to me, sounded ridiculous at first because we didn't have a boat and we didn't know how to get a boat and we didn't know the first thing about boats. But when we thought more about it, there was no other access. So the idea was we'll sail from Cyprus through international waters and make our way to Gaza. We're not entering Israeli waters, so we're challenging this notion that Israel is doing this. Its policy is about security. Here are 44 peace activists from Europe and the United States that just want to go to Gaza. And if Israel was going to stop us, we hope to highlight to the world that Israel's policy is not about security and it needs to be ended. And honestly, we did not think that we would make it to Gaza. We just wanted to expose the policy. In fact, when we were getting ready to go after we had secured 2 small fishing boats and got them ready to sail, I remember telling everybody that, listen, Israel might try to sink our boats. You might get seriously injured. We might die. At best, we might end up in an Israeli jail. So don't feel that you have to go on this mission. But nobody turned back, and not because anybody had a death wish, but it was because we firmly believed that international civilians had to take action when our governments were impotent in the face of such massive cruelty and violations. And so we got on those boats and we sailed. And at the last moment, Israel decided not to intercept us, and our boats were making their way towards Gaza. The first time such boats were able to make it to a Gaza port without Israeli permission in over 40 years. And I wish you would have seen or could have been there with us to see the massive reception. Tens of thousands of people rushed to the port, so happy to see us and hugging us and jumping up and down. And here we were, nationals of the very countries, European and United States, countries that are enabling Israel's genocidal policy against the people of Gaza, and yet they received us so warmly and so happily, thinking and shouting that the siege had been broken. Of course, we knew we did not break the siege with this one voyage, but we knew that it was a very important step, and it reaffirmed the necessity of directly challenging Israel's policies, not standing by because Israel has one of the most powerful militaries in the world, civilians taking action, and we vowed to keep taking action. And we organized future boats, but then Israel started attacking our boats, which culminated in the massive attack on our freedom flotilla in May of 2010.
Yeah. Now, the Israeli occupation aggression against the Palestinians is a continuing story. And today we see how the Israeli settlers, Israeli colonizers' aggression against the Palestinian villages and the Palestinian roads, killing people, stoning their houses, vandalizing their cars. Today, while I'm talking with you, this was happening on the roads between Ramallah and Nablus in occupied West Bank. And now you and the members of the ISM come to the Palestinian villages and refugee camps, but you can expose the colonizers' aggression in different way from where you are. So tell me how you fine-tune your strategy in order to keep the Israeli crimes exposed to the world.
Yeah, that is always a challenge. And in answering this question, I just want to pay tribute to one of the co-founders of the Gaza flotillas, who also was with us in the West Bank and was attacked by settlers. And that was Mary Hughes Thompson, an 87-year-old activist who, when she came to the occupied Palestinian territory in 2003, was brutally attacked and robbed by Israeli settlers who broke both of her arms at the time. She recently passed, and we're so grateful to know her. And she kind of embodied what we see in a lot of internationals that come to Palestine. And it is this life-changing experience when you see the beauty of the land and the people and the warmth of the people, and contrast that with the situation that they are forced to live in, where their land is colonized, they're brutalized by settlers, and occupied and terrorized by a very powerful military. So the question is, what can we always do about it? Our strategy has always been a four-pronged strategy. The first being by the presence of internationals, hoping to lessen the violence used against Palestinians, because internationals are there documenting, and soldiers and settlers don't care about Palestinian lives. They've dehumanized Palestinians completely, but with internationals, sometimes they think twice. So this kind of protective accompaniment, trying to change the way the mainstream media reports on what's happening. This is not Israelis versus Palestinians or a religious conflict. This is more about a people crying out for freedom and that freedom being brutally denied. And then people going back home and word of mouth telling people what's happening. So bypassing the mainstream media, today using social media. And then also advocating on the ground in their home countries for a change in policy so that our governments are no longer supporting Israel's policies and will actually go a step further and sanction Israel for what it's doing to the Palestinian people. So as you can see in that, a part of it is being there and witnessing and then going home and trying to advocate and change policy. And that continues to happen. I know that perhaps when we were first founded and were mobilizing on the ground, international presence got a lot more media attention. Today, internationals are still coming, but they're very much embedded and supporting the Palestinian resistance, which continues daily, and then continuing to go back home and now really supporting and are at the forefront of promoting the global Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And so we continue to advocate on these very different levels, which I think come together with what Palestinians are doing to create a very important front in this freedom struggle. And hopefully, I know to people living daily in this situation, it might not seem like much change is happening, but it's happening.
Yeah, Huwaida Arraf, Palestinian American activist and one of the founders of the ISM. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for watching our program and wish you a nice time. Thank you.